Stock markets in Europe and the United States have fallen sharply in response to further signs that the debt crisis in Greece is intensifying and could spread to other countries. Share prices in New York, London, Frankfurt and Paris fell by more than 2% after a major international credit rating agency, Standard & Poor's, downgraded Greek debt to a level known informally as junk. Niels Blythe has more.
Standard & Poor's downgraded its assessment of Greek bonds to so-called junk status because of the growing danger that the bondholders will not be paid back in full. Many big investment funds have rules that forbid them from holding junk bonds, so the move is likely to trigger a further round of selling. Share markets have taken fright, fearing that if Greece does default on its debts, it will hit many European banks which hold Greek bonds and could trigger a wider financial crisis. Already pressure is mounting on Portugal, which has also seen its credit rating downgraded today, although it remains above junk status.
Officials in Germany say the total financial aid package for Greece could be more than double the $60 billion that was previously expected. The head of the International Monetary Fund, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, is in Berlin trying to persuade Germany to agree to the financial rescue plan. He said the deal needed to be implemented quickly as the situation was getting worse every day and could affect other European countries. But the German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Berlin needed to be certain that Greece was serious about spending cuts.
The head of the International Monetary Fund says Greece has nothing to fear from the organisation. At a news conference in Washington, Dominique Strauss-Kahn said the IMF was trying to provide Greece with the advice and resources necessary to help with its debt problem. Andrew Walker reports from Washington.
Mr. Strauss-Kahn was responding to a Greek journalist who said the Greek public are demonising the IMF, that they fear things will be worse with IMF involvement. The agency has a reputation for requiring borrowing countries to make deep cuts in popular government spending programmes. Mr. Strauss-Kahn said the Greek people should think of the IMF as a cooperative organisation where the countries of the world work together to help those in trouble by providing resources and advice on behalf of the international community.
Finance ministers of the world's leading industrialised and developing countries, the G20, have agreed to continue supporting the global economic recovery. In a statement released after their meeting in Scotland, the ministers said conditions had improved, but economic and financial recovery was uneven and unemployment a worry. Andrew Walker reports.
The communiqué avoids complacency. Although economic and financial conditions have improved, they decided they still need to keep up the initiatives intended to restore growth. The meeting was, however, rather overshadowed by a statement from the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown, suggesting a tax on financial transactions as one of a number of options for making banks pay for the crisis. His calls have been received politely by the finance ministers, but several made remarks which suggest that other ways of tackling the problem are rather more likely to be adopted.
The European Union has initialled an agreement to end one of the world's longest-running trade disputes over bananas. The EU, the world's biggest importer of bananas, is to cut the duty it imposes on Latin American producers of the fruit, while banana growers in former European colonies will gradually lose the preferential terms they've enjoyed. Andrew Walker reports.
The deal, signed in Geneva, commits the European Union to gradually lowering the tariffs it imposes on bananas imported mainly from Latin America. The cut will be over a third by 2017. That will reduce the competitive advantage of a group of countries, mainly former colonies of EU states in Africa and the Caribbean, which enjoy tariff-free access. The EU plans to provide those countries with some compensation in the shape of nearly $300 million in additional aid.
The long-awaited take-off of the Solar Impulse was greeted with delight by those who have spent the last 7 years working on it. The solar-powered plane has the wingspan of a jumbo jet, but weighs less than a family car. It doesn't use a single drop of aviation fuel. Instead, its giant wings are covered with solar cells. The project is the brainchild of Swiss adventurer Bertrand Piccard. He sees the Solar Impulse as a sign of things to come.
It's the world's fastest growing economy and shows no sign of slowing down. So striking deals with Chinese businesses is now the top priority for every British company that wants to stay ahead in global trade. Now schools in the United Kingdom want to give their students a head start by teaching them Mandarin, and they are making it compulsory. Brighton College is a fee-paying private school on the south coast of Britain and already teaches Latin, Spanish and French to its 1,200 pupils. Students can choose between these languages, but from the autumn, which is the beginning of the new academic year in British schools, every student must study Mandarin, whether they like it or not.
The cast and crew of British movies will no longer be hailed as the underdogs at awards ceremonies. At the recent 81st Oscars ceremony, British actors in movies won no less than 11 awards. The list of Oscar winners is usually dominated by American films and actors, but 2009 has seen a more international flavour to the ceremony. British actors and actresses have long awaited such global recognition. Kate Winslet was nominated 6 times for an Oscar before she eventually won the Best Actress award at this year's ceremony. Slumdog Millionaire lived up to its status as a global success and movie phenomenon. The low-budget movie swept the board, winning 8 Oscars, including Best Director and Best Picture. The movie, which documents the life of a young Indian boy after he wins a TV game show, has definitely helped to raise the profile of the British film industry. Summarising the national feeling, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued a statement saying, "Britain is showing it has the talent to lead the world."
It might seem like an unlikely match, an ancient institution getting to grips with cutting-edge technology. But the British royal family has been active online for more than a decade. They launched their own website in 1997, the Queen's Christmas message is available as a podcast, and a year ago the official royal channel was launched on YouTube, showing videos of the family at work. Royal watchers described the 82-year-old Queen as a silver surfer, someone who's enthusiastic about the internet and who keeps in touch with younger members of her family by email.
Well, this weekend, around 35,000 runners filled the streets of London, running the 26th annual London Marathon. The course is 26.2 miles long, 42 kilometres, and goes past many of London's landmarks, such as the Tower of London, the famous 19th century ship Cutty Sark, the Houses of Parliament and Buckingham Palace. The runners actually run over Tower Bridge.
Oxford and Cambridge are the oldest and most famous universities in Britain, and there has always been a great rivalry between the two institutions. But the most public competition between the two is the annual boat race. The 2006 boat race will take place on the 2nd of April and will be the 152nd race of its kind. Both universities are located near rivers, and rowing is a popular and prestigious sport. The very first race took place in 1829, when a Cambridge student challenged a school friend studying at Oxford. Ever since, the defeated team from the previous year challenges the opposition to a rematch. The only times when no boat races took place were during the First and Second World Wars.
Car manufacturers in the United States reported their best results so far this year in August, in large part due to a government scheme aimed at encouraging people to trade in their old cars for more fuel-efficient new ones. The top results among American car makers were posted by Ford, which saw its sales rise by 17% from August of last year. The results helped increase US manufacturing output as a whole for the first time since January of last year. President Obama said the latest figures indicate that the American economy is on the path to recovery.
Financial regulators in the United States have accused the investment bank Goldman Sachs of fraud related to the collapse of the American housing market in 2007. The Securities and Exchange Commission is taking civil action against the bank. Michel Fleury sent this report from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
The Securities and Exchange Commission alleges the bank sold investors a financial product based on subprime mortgages that was designed to lose value. Goldman Sachs has denied the allegations and says it will defend the firm and its reputation. This is the first time that the US government has explicitly accused one of Wall Street's premier institutions of fraud relating to the collapse of the US housing market.
An investigation in the United States has found that the country's top financial regulator, the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, failed to uncover the $65 billion fraud carried out by the convicted financier Bernard Madoff over a 16-year period, despite 5 separate investigations into his business dealings. Greg Wood reports.
The report by the SEC's Inspector General David Kotz reads like a catalogue of bungled opportunities to catch Bernard Madoff long before he owned up to the largest fraud in US history. He was investigated 5 times. SEC staff caught him in lies but failed to follow them up. They rejected offers from whistleblowers to provide additional evidence. Many of the investigators were inexperienced. The scale of the SEC's incompetence is laid bare by this report.
The Bank of America has agreed to pay $33 million to settle accusations by the US government over billions of dollars of bonuses paid out last year by its investment arm Merrill Lynch. Bank of America took over Merrill Lynch to save it from collapse in a deal backed by American taxpayers' money. John Berthree reports.
Bank of America had promised its shareholders that no bonuses would be paid to bankers at Merrill Lynch without its express permission. It agreed to buy the struggling investment bank in September, on the same weekend that talks to save Lehman Brothers from collapse failed. Like Lehman, Merrill Lynch was brought to its knees by debt linked to the US housing market that became toxic and lost its value. But after Merrill's rescue by BOA, it went ahead and paid its staff $3.6 billion in bonuses anyway. Shortly afterwards, Bank of America was forced to go to the government for billions of dollars in extra taxpayer support, and the revelation of the payments caused a public outcry.
After weeks of negotiations, the Governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, has reached an outline agreement with legislative leaders on a plan to tackle the state's massive budget shortfall. The deal, which will have to be approved by the state legislature, includes plans for billions of dollars in budget cuts, but no tax rises. Peter Bowes reports.
California has a budget shortfall of $26 billion. State workers have been put on short time, and many social and education services have been cut. The state has even resorted to issuing IOUs to companies it does business with and to individuals who are owed tax refunds. Governor Schwarzenegger described the compromise deal as a basic agreement to close the state's huge deficit. He and fellow Republicans had refused to raise taxes, while the opposition Democrats had fought to preserve social services.
The American space shuttle Endeavour has blasted off from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on its 6th attempt, after more than a month of delays caused by fuel leaks and thunderstorms. Bill Gerstenmaier of NASA said finally the weather had been favorable, and the shuttle crew were looking ahead to completing the installation of the Japanese Kibo laboratory on the space station.
We had a great launch today. We were ready. The weather finally cooperated, and we had just an awesome launch today. Again, I will caution you that the mission is very challenging in front of us. The 5 EVAs, the robotic activities, will take the absolute best that the teams have, both in Houston and in orbit. The teams are fully prepared. They're ready to go do what they need to go do, and we look forward to the exciting activities as we install the exposed facility out on the Kibo module.
A panel of experts appointed by the White House has warned that current plans to send astronauts back to the moon in preparation for manned missions to Mars are just not viable. One of the panel members, Leroy Chow, says the space agency NASA hasn't been given enough funds to realize the plans.
The fact is that when the vision for space exploration was first announced in 2004, there was an expectation of a certain budget level over the next several years. And frankly, over the last 5 years, those numbers have not been realized. So because of that, we're in the pickle that we're in now.
The experts say the current budget of the space agency NASA would need to be increased by billions of dollars. Without the extra money, the experts say NASA would have to work with private companies now trying to embark on commercial space flights.
Wildfires are a feature of the Californian summer, but it's unusual for them to break out so close to major centres of population. It's hot here and getting hotter, which is drying the brush, making it all the more incendiary. And the forecast is such that there's been speculation it could take firefighters a week to bring this blaze under control. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger is pleading with people in the path of the flames to evacuate as soon as they're told to do so.
Forget that still unwritten report or the backlog of paperwork building up on the desk. On this cold and rainy midweek night, there can be no excuses to stay late in the office. South Korea's Ministry of Health, Welfare and Family Affairs will be turning off all the lights at 7 p.m. in a bid to force staff to go home to their families and, well, make bigger ones. It will repeat the experiment once a month. The country now has one of the world's lowest birth rates, lower even than neighbouring Japan, and boosting the number of newborn children is a priority for this government, staring into the abyss of a rapidly ageing society, falling levels of manpower and spiralling healthcare costs. The Ministry of Health, now sometimes jokingly referred to as the Ministry of Matchmaking, is in charge of spearheading that drive, and it clearly believes its staff should lead by example. Generous gift vouchers are on offer for officials who have more than one child, and the department organises social gatherings in the hope of fostering love amongst its bureaucrats. But critics say what is really needed is wide-scale reform to tackle the burdensome cost of childcare and education that puts many young people off from starting a family.
In Germany, if you think your financial advisor has been giving you bad advice and messing up your investments, you can complain to the regulators. You can go to the police. But in Bavaria, one group of pensioners stands accused of employing a much more direct method of registering their dissatisfaction. They're on trial for kidnapping their financial advisor and holding him hostage. 4 senior citizens, aged between 63 and 79, had invested nearly $3.5 million in the US property market and lost it all in the subprime mortgage meltdown. They'd concluded that the man who'd handled the investment should now reimburse them. According to prosecutors, last summer the pensioner posse, plus one accomplice, abducted the financial advisor outside his house, tied him, gagged him, put him in a box, and transported him in the boot of a car 450 kilometres to a lakeside retreat. He claims to have spent 4 days locked in the cellar there and to have been tortured. After agreeing to their demands, the prisoner was allowed to send a fax to Switzerland arranging payment. He concealed the phrase, "call the police," in the text, and the alarm was raised. Soon after, a crack team of commandos came to the rescue. On the opening day of the trial, the 74-year-old alleged ringleader of the gang avoided using the word kidnap. He said he and his co-defendants had only wanted to treat their guest to a couple of days' holiday in Bavaria.
Thousands of people, many visibly shocked, have gathered outside the presidential palace in the Polish capital Warsaw after President Lech Kaczynski and dozens of top officials were killed in a plane crash in western Russia. The Prime Minister Donald Tusk called the crash the most tragic event in Poland's recent history. The plane came down in the forest as it tried to land in fog at Smolensk airport. There were no survivors. Adam Easton reports from Warsaw.
Thousands of people gathered outside the presidential palace in Warsaw in a spontaneous show of mourning. Families, young and old, brought flowers, others lit candles. The pavement in front of the building is carpeted with flickering flames. The scale of the disaster is unprecedented. Not just the president, but most of the commanders of the armed forces, many leaders from the country's main opposition party, and senior state and church officials died in the crash.
Unemployment in Japan rose to 5.7% in July, the highest figure since the Second World War. The rise came as companies laid off workers because of the world recession. The new figures come only days before a general election in Japan. Our correspondent Roland Burke reports from Tokyo.
The state of Japan's economy is the key issue in the election campaign. So news that the unemployment rate has risen to 5.7% is a blow for the Prime Minister Taro Aso. Opinion polls show his Liberal Democratic Party was already on course for defeat on Sunday for only the second time in more than 50 years. 3,590,000 Japanese were out of work in July, over 1 million more than a year ago. Japan's crushing recession is officially over, but the benefits are yet to be felt by families and workers.
Cuba has accused President Obama of not doing enough to end the U.S. trade embargo against the island despite his promises to improve ties. Mr. Obama has reopened dialogue with Havana, but earlier this week he said it was in America's national interest to extend the 47-year-old embargo for another year. In the first official Cuban reaction to the decision, the foreign minister said U.S. sanctions should be lifted without conditions.
As forecasters say that a cloud of volcanic dust spreading from Iceland across Europe shows some signs of moving, officials have expressed hope that up to half of all flights across Europe could operate on Monday. The European Transport Commissioner and the Spanish Minister for Europe were speaking after talks with the air traffic agency Eurocontrol. Warren Bull reports.
After adopting a cautious approach up till now, the airline industry has increasingly pushed the European authorities to end the flight restrictions which have caused travel chaos in Europe and beyond. Several airlines, including KLM and Lufthansa, have expressed anger that the decision to ground flights appears to have been taken solely on the basis of a computer simulation. They say they've carried out their own test flights and reported no problems. Conscious of a need to show strong leadership over the air travel crisis, European Union transport ministers are expected to hold an emergency video conference on Monday.
Officials in the Philippines say at least 100 people have died in floods and landslides in the north, triggered by a week of heavy rain. This follows 2 storms in the past 2 weeks, which have already left about 300 people dead. Reports said even some evacuation centres had been flooded. Danny Vincent reports from the capital, Manila.
Officials say that 30 cities were hit by the landslides through the night, with residents taken to the rooftops of their houses for refuge. The northern Philippines has been pounded by heavy rain following the second typhoon in just over a week to hit the nation. Typhoon Palma has lingered in the north of the country, turning into a tropical depression. It follows Typhoon Kitsana, which killed more than 300 people when it hit on September 26.
The Prime Minister of Samoa says 77 people were killed and 150 injured by a tsunami in the South Pacific. At least 24 people died on American Samoa. Thousands of people's homes have been destroyed and the final number of deaths is expected to be higher, as Phil Mercer reports from Sydney.
A brutal act of nature has shattered parts of Samoa and neighbouring American Samoa. The rescue effort is continuing, with pledges of international support led by the United States. The number of dead has slowly increased since the tsunami struck just after dawn, and there are fears it will keep on rising as emergency teams reach isolated areas. Foreign tourists, including a British toddler and a 6-year-old Australian girl, are among the dead. Officials believe that many of the victims were washed out to sea as their homes were destroyed by waves, reportedly up to 11 metres high.
Scientists at the world's largest particle accelerator have successfully collided beams of protons at the highest energy levels ever seen. There was cheering in the control room at CERN, the European Nuclear Research Centre in Switzerland, as one of the biggest and most complicated scientific experiments got fully underway. The experiment is seen as a major breakthrough in efforts to understand the fundamental nature of the universe. Dr. Martin White is a research fellow at CERN.
One of the great mysteries of the universe is that most of the mass in the universe is some kind of dark matter. It's some kind of particle that doesn't match anything we've seen before. And if you look in space, you can see this because you can see its gravitational pull. So one of the things that we hope to get reasonably early, and in fact could see in the next 2 years, is some idea of what this dark matter is.
Scientists say they can now definitively back the long-held theory that a huge asteroid striking the Earth some 65 million years ago was responsible for wiping out the dinosaurs and more than half of all animal species on the planet. The scientists finally discounted an alternative theory that volcanic eruptions caused the dinosaurs' demise. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh reports.
The popular conception is that dinosaurs reigned supreme until they were suddenly eradicated from the face of the planet. The theory goes that a giant asteroid crashed into the Earth, wiping out half of all life on Earth. Some scientists, though, say that there's evidence that dinosaurs survived the asteroid impact and became extinct some 300,000 years later. But a new analysis of all the available research has backed the view that it was a giant asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs.
It has been an ambitious project, laying a 17,000-kilometre fibre optic cable under the sea, linking Europe and Asia with East and Southern Africa. Seacom, a Mauritius-based company, is today officially launching the arrival of a fast broadband internet service in Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique and South Africa. It should be commercially available in a few weeks' time. 3 other fibre optic cables are due to become operational soon, including one which is backed by the Kenyan government. In theory, the region could be on the brink of an internet revolution, but it all depends how well the service is rolled out across the region.
It's 60 feet long, made of lightweight, fuel-efficient material, and can carry 8 people out of this world and back. The first commercial spaceship was unveiled by Sir Richard Branson, who hopes to start passenger trips within 2 years. The price tag, £130,000.
In time, we hope to get that price down and down and down, so that, one day people can think, shall I take my family on holiday to the Caribbean, or maybe we should try space travel this year. That's our aim.
Those that can pay will get the ultimate 3-hour thrill ride. The spaceship rockets to 62 miles above the Earth's surface. Passengers will feel weightless for up to 5 minutes before heading down through the atmosphere and gliding back to Earth. Organisers say some 300 have already signed up. Space as a tourist destination may be one step closer.
The United States government has announced plans that it says will ensure that all traffic on the internet is treated equally, regardless of how much bandwidth it takes up. The head of the Federal Communications Commission, Julius Janikowski, said it was vital to safeguard an open and neutral internet. Maggie Shields has more.
In a major speech to a Washington think tank, Julius Janikowski outlined a roadmap for all operators, including wireless, to follow. These are meant to ensure that internet service providers cannot block or slow down internet traffic, like bandwidth hogging video downloads. Mr. Janikowski's move to extend the rules to wireless is down to more people getting online using a mobile phone. Gigi Son of Public Knowledge backs the inclusion of wireless operators because she says wireless is the next frontier and where the great growth of internet access is going to come from.
2 of the astronauts who took part in the first moon landing 40 years ago today have called for renewed efforts to send a manned mission to the planet Mars. They were speaking at a rare public reunion of the crew of the Apollo 11 mission. Command Module pilot Michael Collins said the future of space exploration should be directed at getting to Mars.
Mars was always my favorite as a kid, and it still is today. As celestial bodies go, the moon is not a particularly interesting place. But Mars is. And Mars is the closest thing to Earth's sister that we've found so far.
Pythons, bats and giant armadillos are among the longest sleepers at over 18 hours a day. Human babies need 16 hours, and most of us probably feel we need around 8 hours sleep to function well. Professor Jerry Siegel from the University of California, Los Angeles, conducted a study of the sleep times of a broad range of animals and found that they vary widely. Some, like migrating birds, can survive long periods without sleeping at all. He believes that shows sleep evolved to conserve energy.
It's animals that are needlessly active that will not survive, but animals that are most efficient and use their waking time to do vital functions and are otherwise asleep that will survive.
Sleep helps make best use of limited resources. In humans, when we're awake, our brain accounts for 20% of the energy that we use when just sitting around. Sleeping also makes us less likely to get injured and less likely to be detected by predators.
British and Canadian scientists say they've identified a potential treatment for sleeping sickness, which kills about 50,000 people a year in Africa. The scientists at the University of Dundee in Scotland were funded to research diseases neglected by major pharmaceutical companies. One of them, Professor Mike Ferguson, told the BBC the drug works by disabling a human enzyme essential to the parasite which causes sleeping sickness.
An American government panel has recommended that pregnant women, healthcare workers, children and young adults up to the age of 24 should get priority for the swine flu vaccine released later this year. But the Advisory Committee on Immunisation Practices conceded that the list may change if not enough vaccine is produced by October. Dr. Anne Shushat of the Centre for Disease Control said that pregnant women were particularly vulnerable.
It's vital for pregnant women who have respiratory illness and fever to get early treatment. We think that antiviral medicines for them can be life-saving, and that's a very important message. We also think it's important for them to get seasonal influenza vaccine, and today the committee recommended that when vaccine's available and we have a decision to go forward, that pregnant women really ought to consider getting the H1N1 vaccine.
The United Nations top health official has said the worldwide spread of swine flu is now unstoppable. Dr. Margaret Chan was speaking at a global forum in Mexico where the virus first took hold. Andy Gallagher reports.
The head of the World Health Organization was keen to promote Mexico as a safe destination, despite it suffering the largest number of fatalities since the outbreak began over 2 months ago. Leaders and experts from across the world are here in Cancun to see what lessons can be learned so far, but the advice is still the same. The best way to avoid catching the virus is simple. Wash your hands and avoid coughing and sneezing in public.
President Zuma said he was revealing his HIV status to promote openness and to eradicate the silence and stigma that accompanies the AIDS epidemic. He told a crowd at a hospital near Johannesburg that he'd now had 4 tests, all negative. Mr. Zuma's sex life has been the focus of intense scrutiny and criticism in South Africa. He has 3 wives and has also admitted to having unprotected sex with other women. But if his private life is controversial, his public stance on AIDS has been broadly welcomed here. His predecessor, Thabo Mbeki, questioned mainstream AIDS science and delayed the provision of life-saving drugs. Mr. Zuma, in contrast, is taking a much more proactive role. The campaign he's now backing hopes to get 15 million people tested over the next year and provide drugs to 80% of those needing them. South Africa is the worst affected country in the world. According to UN figures, almost 1 in 8 people are HIV positive.
Research has revealed that 35 million people around the world are suffering from the brain-destroying illness dementia, a much higher figure than previously estimated. About 2/3 of the sufferers live in developing countries, where people are now living long enough to face the illness. One of the researchers, Dr. Rob Stewart, says it's important that people caring for those with dementia are supported properly.
Most of the countries in the world now have Alzheimer charities that support caregivers, and one of the key things they have to sort of fight against in the early stages is that Alzheimer's disease is not a natural part of aging. It's a disorder. Yes, it increases with age, but it's not the same as old age.
There's more evidence that vegetarians are less likely than meat eaters to develop cancer. A study of more than 60,000 people in the British Journal of Cancer suggests they have a lower risk of getting cancers of the stomach, bladder and blood. Adam Brimelow reports.
The lifetime risk of developing cancer in the general population in the UK is about 1 in 3, or 33%. This study suggests that among vegetarians it's significantly lower, 29%. There's already evidence that eating a lot of red and processed meat can raise the risk of stomach cancer. But the reduced rate of blood cancers among vegetarians, including leukemia, multiple myeloma and non-Hodgkin lymphoma, was a surprise. The authors say more research is needed to back up their findings and to try to explain these differences.
An international team of doctors and scientists is calling for more focus on the causes of death among young people around the world, aged between 10 and 24, saying the issue is largely ignored by policymakers. A study published in the medical journal The Lancet found that 40% of adolescent deaths are caused by various forms of injury. Jo McGivering reports.
Until this research was published, there was little data on how many young people die worldwide, in which countries and for what reasons. Now a pattern is emerging. The study suggests the death rate is strongly linked to how poor a country is. Most deaths are in the developing world, driven by high rates of infectious disease and of maternal mortality. But globally, 40% of adolescent deaths are caused by types of injury, including road traffic accidents, suicide and violent attacks.
One of Britain's most popular reality TV programmes has returned to our screens for a 5th series. The Apprentice sees 16 ambitious individuals competing for a job with electronics tycoon Sir Alan Sugar. With endless talk of credit crunches, redundancies and cutbacks, it may come as no surprise that thousands of plucky hopefuls applied for the show. The chosen 16 will compete in a series of business tasks and do their best to escape elimination. Not one of them wants to hear the fateful words, "You're fired." It should also be noted that this year's budding apprentices are not going to be allowed to forget the grim economic climate quite so easily. At the launch of this year's TV show, Sir Alan announced that some episodes have been specifically made towards recognition of what difficult times we are in. The tasks will, as usual, be gruelling tests of business acumen, team working and leadership skill. They will also make for some hilarious viewing. British viewers will be shaking their heads in disbelief at the crazy decisions of the wannabe apprentices.
It's a highly unusual legal situation where the author of a piece of fiction is taken to court because the action takes place in a particular locality, and the owners of that locality feel their name has been dragged through the mud. Yet that's what's happened in the case of Lally Walker's book, Au Malheur des Dames. The Marché Saint-Pierre, where the murder story unfolds, is a well-known fabric store near Montmartre. In the book, staff members go missing as voodoo dolls are pinned to the walls and rumours swirl around the behaviour of the shop's managers. In their plea, the real-life owners of the Marché Saint-Pierre say it's a registered trademark and that no one can write about it without prior permission. They say their image has been seriously harmed by the book and they want damages of €2 million, more than $2.5 million. The author, Lally Walker, is mystified. If you can't set stories in real-life places, she says, then you might as well just give up.
EasyJet has been under investigation here in France since 2006, when an inspection of their operations at Paris-Orly Airport showed they'd failed to register 170 employees to the French authorities. The budget airline is accused of breaking strict labour laws and is now being pursued by the state prosecutor for millions of euros in unpaid social security and health insurance contributions. The budget airline insists that its staff were hired under British contracts and therefore were not subject to French rules. Orly Airport, it claims, was merely a rest area for its workers, and it was the planes themselves and not France that served as their workplaces. The French authorities point out, however, that most of the EasyJet staff lived and paid their taxes in France, and many were working solely on internal flights between Paris and Nice.
An earthquake that struck the remote Chinese province of Qinghai is now known to have killed almost 600 people and injured thousands. The tremor wrecked the town of Jiegu. A BBC correspondent in the province says cold and rain are hampering relief operations. A local teacher told the BBC's Chinese service that almost all residential housing in Jiegu had collapsed, and so had his school.
The extent of the destruction of houses is very bad. More than 80% of the residential houses built with mud and brick have collapsed, and many people have been buried or trapped underneath. We're now helping people to carry out rescues on their own, but we lack heavy lifting equipment.
Thousands were left stranded for a second day after the cold weather brought severe disruption to transport across the country. Some 30 highways have closed in the north of China, and in Beijing, the city's capital airport, saw 90% of flights cancelled or delayed on Sunday. By early Monday, around 40% of flights had been disrupted. In some parts of Beijing, 33 centimetres of snow fell, the heaviest in more than half a century. Volunteers have taken to the streets with snow shovels to clear the drifts. School children saw their New Year holiday extended by the severe weather. Here and in neighbouring Tianjin, they were given the day off. More snow is expected across the north of China, although Beijing is expected to remain clear. But temperatures in the capital, already at -14, could drop even further.
Research into the ice cap at the North Pole has found that it's melting so quickly that the Arctic Ocean could lose most of its ice during summertime in as little as 10 years. Scientists at Cambridge University say a recent expedition to the Arctic, led by the explorer Pen Hadow, found the ice was much thinner than expected and less dense, making it vulnerable to rapid melting. Mr. Hadow says the findings should act as a wake-up call.
The long-term view for the global community is this is definitely not good news, but if we can see this for what it is, which is the biggest visual cue that we are going to get to manage our relationship with the planet better, then that is a good thing.
At one point, the water in the central part of Venice was 1 metre and 56 centimetres above sea level. It hasn't been that high since 1986. Venice gets regular flooding at this time of year, but this was the 4th deepest on record. Dozens of homes and businesses were inundated. Scores of people had to move out, though there are no reports of serious injuries. With mopping up still underway, the authorities say they don't yet know the final cost of repairs. They've appealed to the government for money from a special fund to help in the clear-up. The all-time record for high water was in 1966, when it reached nearly 2 metres. The city then suffered widespread and devastating flooding.
Indonesian officials say a powerful earthquake off the coast of the island of Sumatra has killed 13 people. The quake destroyed many buildings and cut communications in and around the city of Padang. Residents say people are trapped in the rubble and some bridges have collapsed. The quake, which had a magnitude of 7.6, was felt hundreds of kilometres away in Singapore and Malaysia. From Jakarta, here's Karishma Vaswani.
The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center had issued a tsunami alert minutes after the earthquake hit off the coast of West Sumatra, but then lifted it. The tremor was felt as far away as Indonesia's capital city, Jakarta. There have been reports of buildings and houses collapsing in the city of Padang, Sumatra's capital, which is near the epicenter of the earthquake.
It's the world's first historical thesaurus, grouping words by meaning and by date, and it survived fire, lack of funds, and the death of some of its founders. Tomorrow the work will finally be unveiled to academics, prior to its publication in October. Professor Christian Kay of the University of Glasgow began work on the project as a 28-year-old research assistant. She's now 69 and thinks it will be invaluable to scholars not just of linguistics, but of cultural and social history.
You know, if you're interested in something like clothes, it's very interesting to see what people have been wearing for the last 1,300 years. So I was looking at a whole list of words to do with trousers. And there were words that it would never have occurred to you probably that these words meant trousers.
That's where a thesaurus beats a dictionary, she says, but it's much harder work to compile. In the early days, they simply wrote the words on slips of paper and grouped them in different ways.
2 Chinese students who are studying at British universities have been awarded prizes for being the best international students in their respective host countries. Psychology student Yu Si Liu was crowned Welsh International Student of the Year, while Yu Huai Zhang, who studies management, was named Northern Ireland's International Student of the Year. Both students joined 12 regional finalists in next month's final, where one will become the UK's top international student.
University Challenge. Asking the questions, Jeremy Paxman.
It's one of Britain's longest-running TV quiz shows, where the best and the brightest from universities all over the country compete to show off their knowledge on a myriad of topics. University Challenge first went to air nearly 50 years ago, and over the decades it's been a showcase for students facing quickfire questions on literature, physics, geography and philosophy, and everything in between. This year's final was one of the most keenly watched, with students from Corpus Christi College at Oxford University taking on a team from Manchester University.
Most students in the UK leave school or sixth form college at the age of 18 and go to study for 3 years in a university. But in recent years, many students have chosen to take a 1-year break between finishing school and starting university. This period is called a gap year and is a time when British students can broaden their horizons by visiting foreign countries.
As many as 1 million Cubans are said to have attended a free concert in Havana's Revolution Square that featured some of Latin America's most popular musicians. Many in the crowd came dressed in white to symbolise peace. The 5-hour event included bands from 7 countries. It was organised by the Miami-based Colombian rock star Juanes.
This concert is just about peace. It's just about possibility to get together, through music, through art. And this particular case of Cuba, just having isolated from the rest of the community for many years, just because of ideology. So we just want to come here and say, well, we are here, we are the same. So that's the reason why we're here, to promote peace.
So ferocious were the celebrations following Australia's victory in the 1983 America's Cup that the then Prime Minister Bob Hawke said bosses who sacked workers for not turning up to work were bums. It's seen as one of the country's greatest sporting triumphs, but now a Dutch naval architect has come forward claiming that he designed the famous wing keel that helped propel Australia 2 to victory. Peter van Oosenen said he'd grown tired of the Dutch design team being airbrushed out of history and that the record should be corrected. But the businessman Alan Bond, who bankrolled the boat, said the wing keel was 100% Australian and that any other suggestion was codswallop.
After a meeting between the players and hockey's governing body over the weekend, there was hope that a truce had been reached. But on Monday, the whole team refused to go to its World Cup training camp in the western city of Pune. This has angered the governing body, Hockey India, and its president, A.K. Mattu, has told local media that it will consider suspending the team if the issue is not resolved soon. One senior player, Prabjot Singh, told the BBC that the players stood united and would not train until they were paid what is owed to them from previous tournaments.
English hopes for World Cup success have suffered a serious setback with the news that striker Wayne Rooney has broken a bone in his foot. 20-year-old Rooney collapsed in agony after a harmless-looking tackle during Saturday's Premiership game between Chelsea and Manchester United. He was strapped onto a stretcher and carried off the pitch to the applause of concerned fans of both sides.
Less than a few weeks ago, Susan Boyle was a virtual unknown. However, since auditioning for Britain's Got Talent, a televised talent competition, she has experienced a stratospheric rise to fame. A YouTube video of her audition has been watched by more than 26 million people, making it one of the most watched videos on the internet in recent times. It is undeniable that technology such as YouTube, Facebook and Twitter has helped to spread the word about Susan's performance. So just what is it about Susan that the people find so fascinating? Arguably, it is the fact that she is such a class act. However, many have suggested that her biggest appeal lies in her unassuming persona. Susan's persona and appearance have been somewhat controversial, and the initial reaction to her audition has made many people question whether they are guilty of judging a book by its cover. With her plain Jane, middle-aged looks and her no-nonsense approach to life, Susan is perhaps the most unlikely star to be discovered of late.
The Nobel Foundation said the work of all 3 of this year's physics laureates was groundbreaking. Without their research, modern communications technology, including digital cameras and the internet, might not exist. Charles Kao was born in Shanghai but worked in Britain, where in 1966 he developed the idea of transmitting light over long distances using optical glass fibres. Today these fibre cables carry much of the world's data and telephony traffic.
Janet Jackson told the audience at the Black Entertainment Television Awards that the entire Jackson family had wanted to attend the show, but it was too painful. She said she'd been elected to speak on their behalf.
I'm going to keep it very short, but I'd just like to say that to you, Michael is an icon. To us, Michael is family. And he will forever live in all of our hearts.
The actor and singer Jamie Foxx led the celebrity tributes with an upbeat performance. He said there was no need to be sad and that the night was an opportunity to celebrate the singer's achievements.
The Australian Parliament has rejected government plans to introduce an ambitious carbon trading scheme to tackle global warming. If the government is defeated again, it could trigger a general election. Nick Bryant reports from Sydney.
The emissions trading scheme was the centrepiece of the Rudd government's environmental strategy. Its aim was to cut greenhouse emissions by 5% over the next 10 years. Yet the Rudd government does not control the upper house of the Australian Parliament, the Senate, and the measure has been defeated by 42 votes to 30. Outside the ruling Labour Party, this was a friendless measure. Green senators had called for more stringent reductions. The opposition Liberal Party believed the scheme would hammer the all-important mining sector and was being rushed through Parliament without proper consultation.
A new study on climate change says a catastrophic 4-degree rise in global temperatures is increasingly likely to occur within many people's lifetimes. The study has been compiled by one of the world's leading research bodies monitoring climate change, the Hadley Centre in Britain. Paul Harper reports.
This latest prediction from the Hadley Centre brings the prospect of devastating change much closer. It challenges the assumption that severe warming is a threat only for future generations. A 4-degree average temperature rise by the 2050s would bring increases of 10 degrees or more in some areas such as the Arctic and Africa. It could mean a sharp decline in rainfall in some areas, flooding in others, and the extinction of up to half of all the world's animal and plant species.